move on to ever more interesting areas where we're going to get some more war stories, and we're getting to the real nitty-gritty here legally, apart from structuring. Structuring is important, but copyright's more important, and that's why we have Jonathan Carter here from APRA, which is probably one of the largest copyright administering industries and companies in the country. Jonathan, can you do what you will, of course, can you do a really good job of this, but quickly, succinctly explain APRA's role, and then perhaps we'll unpack what music copyright is so that everyone can be clear about that.
Sure can. Just to get a quick show of hands, without wanting to reinforce the whole primary school desk thing, who's heard of APRA? That is so good. So as you all know, Jules is making a funny joke about there being an organisation called the Australasian Prudential Regulation Authority, and a lot of people assume that I work at that, and being a lawyer is a non-starter at a dinner party, but working for that organisation is even worse. So
That's a pretty good impression.
I try to clarify that as early as possible in any introductory setting. As you all know, APRA does represent the songwriters and music publishers of Australia and New Zealand, and I know we had a bit of a joke about it at the beginning, but we do see ourselves as a really important organisation, for songwriters at all stages of their career, not just when you've hit the big time, but particularly in those early stages where you haven't signed yet to a music publisher, you haven't done a label deal. But you are doing a bit of live performance, maybe you're getting a few songs out on airplay. We are the beginning of that income stream for artists right at the early stage of their career. And what we represent for songwriters and musicians is one part of the copyright in a recording. And in any recorded piece of music, there are two sets of copyright, and I'm probably preaching to the converted here, and a lot of you already know this, but there's a set of copyright that exists in the underlying song, right? The composition and the lyrics. That's what APRA's about. That's what APRA licenses on your behalf to big organisations like commercial broadcasters and Apple and Google and cinemas and nightclubs and the local live venue around the corner. We grant organisations like that a licence to use your songs, and then they pay us a licence fee, and we distribute that licence fee to our members. There's another set of copyright, which is copyright that exists in the recording. That's not what APRA is about. That copyright is generally controlled by the person who made the recording. So if you're signed to a label, it's usually the label. But if you, depending on the nature of the deal that you did with the label, so we'll come back to that later. But the licensing, the collective licensing of the sound recording, which is the track, that's licensed by PPCA on your behalf rather than APRA. So when I talk about APRA and I talk about what we do, I'm talking about the copyright in the songs, the underlying musical work and compositions. And in order to distribute the license fees that we collect on our members' behalf from all of these big organisations, and collectively those organisations pay us a hell of a lot of money each year. They pay us over $250 million each year. And in order for us to get that money back to our members, back to the songwriters and music publishers, we need two pieces of information. We need reports from those licensees, from those big organisations, to tell us which music they used and how much they used it. So that can take the form of, say, a broadcast report from Channel 9, where they tell us every piece of music that was used in every program that was broadcast on every day of the year, so we know how the music was used. Or it can take the form of a sales report from Apple iTunes with literally hundreds of thousands of lines of data which tell us every track that was downloaded by every person in Australia and New Zealand and how much was paid for that track. We get all of that information, we put it into our big database, and then we match that information up with the songwriters and music publishers who created that work. But in order to do that, we need a work registration from the songwriter or the music publisher. And when I say work registration, what I'm talking about is the ownership details of that song that you provide to APRA when you become a member. And it's a really simple registration process, but it's amazing, how often it doesn't happen. But, if I can say one thing here without doing a hard sell, it's like, hopefully, and Julia will correct me if I'm wrong, but a really important thing to do when you're at the outset of your career is to join APRA and get your works registered so everybody knows who controls, who owns those works and in what shares. Because right at the outset of your career, that might not mean a meaningful income flow, but it means you're into the system. It's recorded and it's known who owns those songs. And if your career does happen to suddenly take off, you're already set up, you're already in the system, and the income flow might be small at the beginning, but as Blue Juice will tell you, or as Lord will tell you, or as Sia will tell you, it can pretty quickly turn into a really meaningful income stream.
And Tim can tell you too.
And certainly Tim can tell us that as well. Yeah. You and Lord, yeah.
I'll come to Tim in a minute about his experience with APRA, but I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background. And the guy who wrote Three Musketeers set up the first collective administration of copyright society, because the thing is, these guys owned copyright in their books, but it was very difficult for anyone to get licenses to print them. There's no place you could go and do it legally. They were getting hammered by pirates, and so they got together and came up with a concept of collective administration, where all the different people who authored books said, you sir, you look after my rights, people can come to you and get a license, and you take some money and you keep a little bit and you give the rest to me. So that concept is it's expedient for copyright owners, but it also then raises issues about monopolies and who controls works and so on and so forth. But one thing that has to be said for APRA is that of all the collecting societies in the world, it is one of the most efficient, I believe. And every few years has to go back to the Copyright Tribunal and say, we're doing this right, we're doing this fair. Everyone gets a chance to complain about the fact that APRA owns such a wide range of rights, and year after year after year, they get their license again. So there is something about the way that collective administration works that society really appreciates. But more than that, APRA also lobbies very, very hard for musicians' rights and so on within the areas it can operate. And I wanted to ask you, Tim, have you found APRA's involvement or input or assistance, if any, with your career over the years?
No pressure, mate.
I think that it's almost like one of those areas where we could probably talk about all of the mechanics of how APRA works and what benefits it can bring to artists and managers who take care of artists. But really, just don't worry about it. It's really awesome, and it's a really easy process to be able to register your songs. And it is one of those little saving graces that every now and again throughout the course of a year, when you're just struggling to pay rent or whatever it is that you're doing as someone who is involved with the writing of songs, that you do have some sort of money that just suddenly appears in your bank account, and there's no one in the history of music that has ever argued with that. And we don't need to kind of elaborate on it. It is just something that you must do, and that's the end of the story.
It's a kind of rite of passage getting your APRA. I think I made $2.35 in my entire career.
Yeah, that's right. Like the framing of the 37-cent first payment is an essential rite of passage of any musician.
It's not a reflection of your musical ability, Jules.
I'm so glad you said that. See, APRA supports musicians, even mediocre ones.
But that's the other thing, is that any musician that is worth their salt probably goes through a whole bunch of fluctuations through their career from the start to the end. And much like the car gears, you have to sometimes slow down and speed up. And what happens is you accumulate more songs, is that every time that you get a report, you see that your database of songs, which is accumulating 2 cents or 10 cents or $10,000 or whatever it may be, it all just adds up. And any real music career tries to somehow get a little bit of money here and a little bit of money there and a little bit of money there and a little bit of money there, and if you are lucky, you're forming some kind of actual wage that will probably complement the other job that you're doing. However, it's all these little bits that add up, and so it is. I mean, I've just told you that we shouldn't elaborate, and I have, so I apologise, but really,
I think it's okay to elaborate because it's actually quite technical, and this is a law panel, and so I wanted to just quickly turn to the technicalities of the copyright law that are operating here. Now, Julie will correct me because I'll probably forget one, but the right of copyright is the exclusive right, and particularly for musicians, let's say, the exclusive right in your own songs to perform them in public, to communicate them across the internet by streaming or whatever, to copy them, would include making recordings of them on media like discs or MP3s or whatever, publishing that material in the market more widely. And there's one other one, isn't there, John? What is that?
Adaptation.
Adaptation, which is important because every time you do a cover and muck it up, you're adapting it. But the point is, when you join APRA, you actually assign to APRA the first two I mentioned, the performing right and the communication right. Now, why that's interesting to people who look hard at monopolies is that the communication right means that if you join APRA, APRA owns the right to communicate your songs across the internet in any way whatsoever. Is that a bad thing? Jonathan's going to tell us why not.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, and just to clarify, I mean, you've got the public performance, right? So that's a live performance in your local pub or at a nightclub or something like that. The communication right, as Jules said, that's communication over the internet. So think of like a streaming service such as Spotify or a download such as iTunes. And then a subset of the communication right is the broadcast right. It's a type of communication. So that right is controlled by APRA as well. And, you know, Jules goes on about a monopoly, and it's true, APRA is a monopoly. But, you know, imagine a world without APRA and how the music industry would function. I mean, without collective licensing by an organisation like APRA, under the Copyright Act, every single time work was performed down at your local pub, an individual clearance would have to be obtained from the copyright owner of that song. Every single time a song was broadcast over radio, an individual permission would have had to be obtained from the copyright owner of that song. It's just unworkable, right? So, yes, APRA is a monopoly, but what it aims to do is to make the music industry wheels spin as efficiently as possible. And it's not the Copyright Tribunal we go to every 4 years to get an approval to keep on going. It's the ACCC. The ACCC, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, not a nice bunch of people, not a friendly group to sit down and have a chat with every 4 years. But what they do is they really focus in on keeping APRA accountable to that principle of efficiency. And, you know, we're a non-profit organisation. We bring in over $250 million a year. About 12% of that is deducted to cover our administrative overheads. There are sort of 300 odd people, operating this business on behalf of Australian songwriters and music publishers, and then we pay the rest out. So, you know, why is it not a bad thing? Because, quite frankly, negotiating with organisations like Apple and Google and Foxtel and Hoyts, not Hoyts anymore, but Village Roadshow, you know, these are serious, big corporate players who, if you were negotiating, you know, as a small music publisher or as an independent songwriter, they would just go, get effed and sign the standard contract. Whereas APRA, you know, we've got a little bit more muscle. We represent sort of the songwriters collectively. If that organisation wants a blanket licence for all of the repertoire of all of our members, as well as the whole world's repertoire because of all of our reciprocal arrangements with the APRA equivalents around the world, then the General Counsel for Google has to come and talk to me and we can have a discussion about it. And, you know, again, we joked about it at the beginning, but I spend my days going into work and doing the very best deal that I can for Australian songwriters and music publishers, extracting the highest licence fee that I can for our music industry out of organisations like Google so that the profits don't flow offshore before taxes are paid and come back to the Australian industry. So that's why it's a good thing.
You heard it here. That always deserves a round of applause. So you're now armed with any arguments if someone moans about it, because really it is a terrific service.
Jules, can I chime in here?
Ben would like to chime in.
Very, very briefly. When you sign up for APRA, you sign up for each song gets signed up in the percentage of who wrote what, ostensibly. You get taxed based on what you've signed. You put your ABN in there, you get issued an invoice. When you get your royalty check, that comes through, that's taxable to you. That might sound great, but it does mean tax planning is quite difficult because you have no idea what to expect a lot of the time, what that next APRA check, it could be 1,000, it could be 30,000, which is very difficult for tax planning. That might sound like a good problem to have, and to be honest, it is. Where I've found there's a lack of communication, I think, with my lawyer colleagues, is that a lot of the time band agreements will say APRA needs to go back in to fund the band. It needs to go back in to pay for touring, it needs to go back whatever, which is great as far as we're all in together, let's do this together. It's very difficult as far as tax goes because that money that got put into that individual's account, they pay tax on that. When they give it back to the band in the partnership or a company or whatever structure the band's operating under, it's a loan, which is not a tax deduction. So you'll find that that songwriter is paying tax on money they don't actually get to utilise. And it's just something to keep in mind when you're having these lovely conversations about what to do with the APRA money. Whoever receipts it based on whatever you've told APRA is the one who has to pay the tax on it.
Ben, is there a threshold? Like you won't pay tax until it hits X dollars?
Yes. I want to say it's now, I'm terrible at this, I want to say it's 16, 17,000. 18,000, thank you, man with the iPad. It's like 18,000 before you have to pay any tax. But then again, the problem with the APRA is you have no idea. You just don't know what's going to come, which is great, but it also makes it difficult to tax plan.
Thanks, Ben. That tax consequence is potentially quite frightening if you have a hit and you get a bill that's got to be paid by X date. So if you are contemplating ploughing your APRA back into your band, you probably have to take it first and then plough it back into the loan or some other structure, which Ben would be happy to advise you about if you're pulling that sort of APRA money down. Are there any other questions about APRA?
Just about differentiation between, what's the difference between a songwriter and a music publisher is the first part. The second part is there any conflicts of interest between a songwriter and a music publisher? And the third is, what's the difference between a music publisher and a label?
That's like you're reading my notes. That's fantastic. Any other questions? We'll come back to that one as well. It's pretty compound, but it's right on topic.
If you've paid for your own recordings and you own all the copyright in your own material and then you're an APRA member, are there any limitations, let's say if you want to sign up with, let's say, MGM, which is a distributor online for your material, do you have any obligations to inform APRA of anything, or because you've assigned the communicative right and the broadcasting right, are you then, for example, limited if you want to take your own business forward to do things before you inform APRA because two rights have been assigned away to APRA?
I'm going to take all those in a lump because they're all right on topic here. Julia, can you address the difference between a music composer and a publisher?
Yeah, so I'm really confused. Thank you. So a songwriter or a composer is the person who actually created the musical work, who wrote perhaps the chords and the lyrics, or if you're in the world of different genres of music, made the beats, or wrote the rhymes. So all these people are potentially the songwriter or composer. A music publisher is a person or a company, a business that is that collects rights or does deals with songwriters to acquire their rights or to license their rights, to look for business opportunities and ways to exploit those songs for money. And then collects and does some of the administrative tasks as well of collecting that income on behalf of the songwriter. So it's looking for opportunities for a songwriter or composer, collecting the income and distributing it to that songwriter. And the way that relationship works varies depending on who the music publisher is and what kind of deal you do.
So the publisher's the pimp.
The publisher is the pimp, says Ben. Jono, there's something very interesting the way APRA rights intersect with music publishing. Can you unpack that a bit for our people here today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to what Julia said. I mean, music publishers do a couple of other things as well. They will typically sign up an act, a band, prior to a band doing a label deal, and usually as part of that deal they'll pay in advance, so you get an upfront piece of funding which might help to record your demos, it might help to sort of pay your early touring costs and things. So in one sense you can think of a publisher as a bank that is willing to loan to you when a normal lending institution may not. Because the music business is inherently risky, and advances are very often not recouped. The other thing is that most publishers will have an A&R function, which is a creative person on the inside who can assist songwriters in developing their craft or put them in touch with other songwriters to assist them in doing co-writes and the like. And the third function, which is really where I think Jules was heading, is a licensing function. And so as we spoke about, APRA only licenses a subset of the copyright in the songs. We do the communication rights and the public performance rights. Publishers would typically license, say, what's known as the synchronisation reproduction right. So if your song was to be included in a television episode or a movie, then that initial what's known as a synchronisation licence in the business would be granted by the publisher on behalf of the songwriter. Because in return for that advance that the publisher pays the songwriter and the ongoing royalties, the songwriter will normally give those reproduction rights, including the synchronisation reproduction right, to the music publisher. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the other thing to bear in mind about the way APRA and music publishers intersect is that if you're smart enough to have joined APRA early, that communication and performing right are safe with APRA within the licensing scheme. And you just can't give them to a publisher who will have probably a stronger bargaining position than you. So that whole income stream is kept preserved away from the main publishing deal. Now, of course, publishers aren't all, rat bags. They're a hugely important part of the industry, and they have a membership relationship with APRA too. And there's an agreement in APRA's rules whereby the money gets divided between the publisher and the writer. But you see, you've always got your half of the APRA money there, and it can't be taken off you in a negotiation by a music publisher. That's another important way APRA intersects and saves you an income stream that you might otherwise give away just so you can, fund a recording or hire a rehearsal studio for a year or whatever it takes.
Can I just add one thing to that? I mean, if you ever enter into a music publishing deal, and no music publisher will mind me saying this, in the grant of rights clause, make sure the magic words "subject to the prior rights of APRA" appear. That's what Jules is talking about. When you grant rights to a music publisher under a music publishing deal, it should always be subject to the prior rights of APRA, because that's what preserves your entitlement to that writer share, the 50% of royalties that will always flow from APRA directly to you as the songwriter, not via the music publisher who will use it to recoup your advance or take a share out of it, straight to you, subject to the prior rights of APRA.
Can I just say something about that? I think that the place to be wary of those words missing, which I think people don't think about, is in like single song publishing agreements, which can happen when, for example, if you compose something for a music production company that does music for film and TV and commercials, they will often want to sign your publishing for that one song, and they're the places that we often see that the APRA rights aren't preserved. So that's just a little kind of warning.
The effect of not preserving them means that you will be stuck between having agreed one thing with APRA and another thing on this other deal. And in the other deal, the other publishing agreement, you will have indemnified the publisher for any damage, and if they want to be nasty about it, they can say, well, you promised something that wasn't true and it's cost us, this amount of money, and you could be on the hook. Just to briefly loop back through your question, so we've talked about the difference between a publisher and a writer. We're going to talk about recording versus publishing in a minute. And you will have picked up from that discussion that your music copyrights are separate to your sound recording copyrights. So when you're letting someone like MGM distribute your music, you have to have a discussion with them about if they're going to put it online, will they put it through services that are licensed from APRA?
So because you just mentioned that you indemnify APRA, inevitably you actually have to let MGM know that those songs are subject to the APRA copyrights, because then why if they indemnify MGM?
Only to the extent that MGM, we get a little bit granular, but it's worth going there. Only to the extent that MGM is going to be using a communication right by trying to put it online, they may have to make their own promises. But the thing is, most of the music distribution services have licenses with APRA, which just looks after it. Ben, just to head to a quick tax question on this. Due to the economics of the recording side of the industry, which is largely based on you paying back all the costs out of your royalty, the main bulk of money you're going to receive from your songs, let's put aside gigging income, is going to come from the publishing APRA side. So if you can get these incredibly scalable hits where suddenly there's lots of money that you didn't have yesterday about the hit, what are ways you can deal with sudden surges of income to minimise your tax or avoid a nasty bill? Can you average the income out, or can you do a deal with the ATO? How does it work?
Speak to your accountant before you spend the money. It depends on who earned the money ultimately, what deals it in. APRA, for example, needs to be earned in your own name, so there are laws that are applicable to an individual who's earned the tax. If you'd sign that recording deal, the publishing deal, or whatever in the name of your company, then the company will pay the tax. And generally, if it's in a company, you don't really need to worry about it too much. There's a lot of clever things you can do. I think what Jules was angling at is that for an individual, and this could be through any income you earn as an artist, that could be royalty income, it could be wage income, contract income, whatever, you're able to access something called special professional income averaging, which very, very briefly, it takes the last 4 years worth of your artist income, takes an average and compares it to your current year. If your current year is more than what you used to earn, you pay a lot less tax. There's an offset and all artists are able to access that.
I mean, that is a nice problem to have, as long as you've got someone like Ben advising you on how to average it and save you from the nasty bill. One question over here.
Yeah, Jonathan, you mentioned that you collect license fees from iTunes. Now, can you just explain how that works? Because if people are actually paying to download a song, why are iTunes paying a licensing fee?
So, a consumer pays $2.19 to download a track from iTunes. Around 65 to 70% of that amount goes to the owner of the sound recording. So the label, or if you're an independent producer, goes to that. 9% of that goes to APRA AMCOS. APRA manages the business of AMCOS, one and the same. And that is for the exercise of the communication and reproduction rights in the song. So when a track is downloaded from iTunes, the communication right is being exercised because the song's been made available on the service, it's been electronically transmitted to your computer at home. So there's the communication right. And then when you reproduce it, when you download it onto your hard drive at home, there's the reproduction right. And that's what triggers the payment to APRA AMCOS. So every single time that happens, 9% of the retail price that's paid by the consumer gets paid to APRA AMCOS. We get a sales report from iTunes at the end of every month with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lines of data, and we pay out each quarter, having processed and matched those sales reports to our database.
The opposite. It's what used to be known, what was otherwise known as mechanicals, right? And a mechanical is non-existent when you don't have an actual kind of physical product being created. So it's a new term.
Can I ask a
Yes.
question to Jono? Oh, hi. You're relying on the accuracy of the data that these companies like iTunes, Channel 9, or any of the networks are giving you. So do you audit that? How is that controlled?
Yeah, in any agreement with a major player like that, a key clause is the audit clause, and we will exercise that if we have doubts over the veracity of the sales reports. I mean, in any commercial arrangement like that, you have to have a degree of trust that their systems and operations. These are major corporate players who, if they're screwing around with their sales reports and underreporting, that's a pretty serious. That's a pretty serious piece of conduct. But in answer to your question, yes, we have audit rights, and they enable us to go in and appoint an independent accountant to go in and verify the sales reports that we're being provided with.
What about the smaller players then, like a boutique in a Westfield that's playing a CD?
So that's more like an issue of compliance. So, there might be a small store in far north Queensland that we don't know about that is playing background music in its, dress shop. We do our very best to ensure that we have a market penetration. We have licensing officers who are out on the road, walking around, going into shops, noting whether or not background music's being played, checking back to head office to see if they've got a license. If not, they go in and have a polite conversation with the licensing manager and say, are you aware that you're publicly performing music and you need to have a license? And they'll say, but we bought the CD. We don't need to have a public performance license. And then you start to have a conversation around the different rights that are being exercised. So.
Kind of like parking cops.
It's like an army of...
I see them coming and you turn the CD off.
It's not a great job. It's not a great job.
Yes.
Question as well. Whoa, I'm really bad at this. I was just wondering what the MEAA do to concern themselves with these topics and how they might like to protect artists who don't feel that they can understand this level of detail.
I'm also an artist who doesn't understand this level of detail, so it's good to have these bodies that are sitting literally next to us. And hopefully the idea is that the MEAA, and I'm part of AFMA, who's the little section that looks after musicians, we are wanting to be the body that you call and you say, I don't know anything about copyright, and we can say, well, here's the person to speak to on that, and we've got a list of accountants that you can that we can recommend for musicians and that sort of thing. I guess musicians, there's not heaps of you in the room, but I can pretty much guarantee that none of you are good at this, because I'm really bad at it. So I often delegate, and I think that that's the key in this. In the music industry, is to figure out who the people are that are really good at this and let them do their job. So as Tim said, don't worry about whether APRA is, well, should I, shouldn't I? Just do it, because it's that's the industry standard. And I think that's where the MEAA stands, the union stands on just making sure that you know who these people are and you acquaint yourselves with them and what they do. That's the best way. Knowledge is power.
Can I ask what the difference between the MEAA and APRA is? Because it sounds like APRA is a union for musicians, but in two specific areas, I suppose, or one or two specific areas. But you guys do what?
Well, maybe I can answer that. I'm an organiser of 10 years with MIA and have worked in the new musician section that we've been setting up. Yes, APRA is a membership-based organisation, but obviously they have a specific role to do with copyright and making sure that artists' copyright is protected and improved over time. But what we're starting with musicians, and I think why we're here tonight is to let people know that we're going to be a campaigning organisation to try and not only protect and advise about the rights you have, but also have discussion with professional musicians across the industry about improving those rights over time as well. And I suppose where we're at the moment in terms of focusing on Sydney, our focus is really on the live performance area and talking more about gig fees, and maybe we're going to talk about that a bit later, and focusing in terms of what you actually get paid as a professional and the respect you receive. But part of that, as Katie has pointed out, is making sure that you have the best possible knowledge about how professionally you need to approach the industry, making sure that you have a contract and then you get some advice about how that contract should look once you're setting up or you're going with an agent, for example, but also having the obvious advice, and it's very good advice at the start of the discussion with APRA, was join APRA, take advantage of what they already do. And I suppose the perspective from me and after the freelance musicians, the reason that we chose freelance in the title of what we're trying to do within MIA is because there's a whole lot of freelancers out there calling themselves maybe sole traders, not sure whether they should set up as a company. We want to be a point of contact to farm people out to get the best possible advice, but also to support to improve those rights over time as well. But yeah, maybe we'll talk about gig fees as well and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
in a bit more detail.
We've been moving from the very theoretical and down towards the stuff you have to deal with, which are actually conditions and awards and all those sorts of things. Maybe now would be a time to take a break from the theory of copyright and have a talk about some of these practical issues, so that we'll get a bit of a brain rest. Do you guys want to have a quick drink break, or should we keep on charging on?